So here's an interesting thing about doing a Rubik's Cube. You can learn the beginner method of doing it in a couple of days. You start by making the white cross, and then you use some simple algorithms to solve it layer by layer. But if you want to solve it in less than 3 minutes, you actually have to get slower before you get faster. You need to learn a whole bunch more algorithms and a more complicated system that eventually lets you do it in fewer moves. That's an example of backing up to move forward, which is just one of the ideas I've taken from this excellent book, Hidden Potential by Adam Grant, which is all about building the character skills and motivational structures that can help you kind of level up in life, no matter where you already are. There's a ton of really useful information in this book, and I'm going to come back to backing up. But before we can get to that, we need to talk about why it's important to chase discomfort. So the key idea in the first section of the book is that comfort in learning is a paradox. You won't really feel completely comfortable with a skill until you're already good at it, but in order to get good at it, you need to be uncomfortable for quite a long time. And so Grant makes the point that accelerating your learning means being brave enough to use your knowledge as you acquire it, take risks, and be willing to make mistakes. And an idea that I really love in this section is that you should be willing to make more mistakes than other people make attempts. And so to do that, Grant suggests setting a mistake budget and a number of mistakes that you want to make in a week or a day or a practice session. So for instance, Benny Lewis, who's a polyglot who speaks more than 20 languages, aims to make 200 mistakes every day. And he's done stuff like accidentally saying that he's attracted to a bus in another language before. And as Benny puts it, the best way to feel good about making mistakes is to make more mistakes. So obviously this is great advice when you're learning foreign languages, but it's also something that I've recently found with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm in a pretty small club and I'm one of the better guys there, so if I really want to, I can just basically avoid losing or getting tapped most of the time. But getting better means exposing my weaknesses and working on stuff that I'm not very good at. So more and more, I'm putting myself in positions where I'm not good and trying moves that I don't really know, so that I get out of my comfort zone and learn new skills. And a key way to do that is to become a sponge. So there's some fascinating stuff in the book about sponges and how they can sometimes live over 2,000 years by regenerating and adapting to their environments. But for the purposes of this video, all you really need to understand is that being a sponge is about being proactive and filtering information, which means that how hard you work isn't as important as how well you learn. So a good example of filtering is looking for people who are credible in the area that you want to improve in, but also ones who know you well enough to understand what will actually help you improve, and ones who care about you enough to actually give you relevant advice. If one of those things is missing, the person you're talking to might not be the best fit for you. But if you find someone who understands the domain you're trying to improve in and cares about you and your skills, you should pay attention to what they're saying. And a really simple way that Grant suggests to be more proactive is to swap asking for feedback in general to asking, what's the one thing I can do better? Because that'll prompt people to give you specific advice rather than like general platitudes about how well you're progressing. I've actually mentioned in another video that this is one of the very best things you can do to improve your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu quickly, because it'll stop people from wanting to make you feel good and going, oh yeah, you're definitely getting better, man, to going, okay, you need to fight for that underhook more from half guard or whatever. If that doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. But another thing that Grant recommends that is great for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is to turn practice into play. And so we've all heard of the 10,000 hour rule and deliberate practice, but even among top performers in fields where the skills are really well defined, like chess or piano, there's actually a huge amount of variation in how long it takes to get good. And the problem is, deliberate practice is really difficult and boring, almost by design, and it can lead to what psychologists actually call bore out. But in contrast, Grant makes the point that top performers benefit from something that psychologists call harmonious passion, which he says that you can develop with something that he calls deliberate play. So the most basic version of this is to introduce elements of self-challenge into your practice, like trying to break your personal best for shots on a basketball hoop or measures played correctly on the piano. But the next step up is to deliberately design games that improve the qualities that you want to get better at while still feeling like fun. So an example that Grant gives is that Steph Curry's coach Brandon Payne has him playing dozens of different games to work on skills like shooting, footwork, and even stamina, while still making them enjoyable for Steph. And again, this is something that works really well in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because by giving people a game to play, you can let them get a ton of time in important positions while they still enjoy themselves and have a reasonable level of challenge to contend with. Obviously, it does help to have a dedicated coach to do some of this stuff because they will know how to craft these games correctly. But it's also sometimes possible to do it on your own, which is where Grant's next bit of advice comes in, which is to find a compass. And so the idea here is that you don't necessarily need a map to plot out every point on the course that you're going to take. Sometimes you just need a compass that points you in the right general direction so that you can forge your own path. Or you can do this on your own or with one guide, but something that Grant really recommends is finding multiple guides who can drop pins in the map for you and suggest new directions to try. Part of the skill in using these guides is to find the right questions to ask them so that they can frame their own experiences in a way that's helpful for you. So you might want to ask them about the skills they found most useful, the best advice they've ever been given, the advice that wasn't actually that worthwhile for them, or just telling them what you've already tried, which might kind of prompt them in the direction of thinking of something that they haven't already suggested to you. And this is where backing up to move forward comes in, because sometimes the only way forward is to reverse direction for a little while. So another good example of this that Grant gives is that if you're learning to type, going faster than about 40 words a minute means that you need to type without looking at the keys, which in the short term is going to slow you down and lead you to making a bunch of mistakes before you can get any faster. And basically the same thing happened for me with piano, because I spent too long looking at the keys and then I had to back up a whole bunch so I could sight read better and work without looking at them. So it is important to take other people's input on board, but this is where maybe my favourite bit of advice in the book comes in, which is to harness high and low expectations. So there are a ton of studies to show that expectations are often self-fulfilling prophecies. When employers or teachers set high standards for us, we tend to work harder and perform better. And on the flip side, something called the golem effect holds us down when people underestimate us, which basically limits our effort and growth. But there's new research to suggest that you can actually use both types of expectation, both high and low, to your advantage by focusing on where they come from. Basically, when you're invested in a goal, being doubted by an expert is a threat. But if you're doubted by an uninformed audience, you can actually be motivated to shatter their expectations and show them that they've underestimated you. Meanwhile, having somebody uninformed who believes in you isn't really that much of a confidence booster, but finding an expert who believes in you is. So the real lesson here is to take motivation from doubters who don't know your strengths or what you've already been through, but also to build relationships with people who understand your abilities so they can make sure you're on the right path, or at least point you in the right direction. And a huge part of that is learning to communicate better, both conversationally and in the written word, which is why I think those are both overpowered skills, and I've done a video that includes them right here. I will see you over there.